the lore that was created about them, like what you imagine the Crusades were versus what they
Really were,
and then like the little microcosms that happened within, Saladin's physician and the king of Jerusalem and all those little microcosms that happened within the Crusades. The whole period is just fascinating.
But at least Moses ben Maimon or Maimonides transferred works about Aristotle, including his own interpretations of Aristotle, to monks. They bring this back, and it's not just that one occasion, but there's lots of occasions where eventually translations from the Arabic, which are translations of the Greek of Aristotle's works, come back into Europe. When previously they only had a few. They had some logic books that had been translated into Latin by Boethius, for example. But in any case, it all comes back in. And as I kind of emphasized when we went from Plato to Aristotle, Aristotle's philosophy really kind of puts paid to Plato's philosophy. It's much more reasonable, makes sense, and as a result, as it comes into Europe over the space of roughly 200 years, you end up with sides in the monasteries. You have the Aristotelians and you have the Platonists, the ones following still Augustine and church dogma, right? And it's a conflict. And in other words, it looks like you can't believe both. That essentially it's like science trumping faith, right? And the conflict that this causes in the monasteries becomes kind of absolutely desperate. And so the Pope, I forget which one it was, but basically calls on Aquinas. So Aquinas is not the first Aristotelian. His teacher, who is Albertus Magnus, which means Albert the Big, or the Great. Magnus, confusing. It could be he's just big. We have the same thing with Peter the Great, the Tsar. When you look at Peter the Great in Russian, it's Pyotr Veliki, which means he was tall, and in fact he was. He had the same growth problem that Lincoln had. So they were like, probably in pain, but also really tall. And so when they say Peter the Great, wasn't so much because they certainly did highly respect him. They had to, because he was the Tsar. And he did some things that were absolutely amazing. But at the same time, he was just tall. And the same thing puzzles me about Albertus Magnus, because it could just mean he was big. And Thomas, even the way he's usually depicted, he's depicted as fairly big. In fact, I read one thing where in one monastery that he was in, they literally had to cut an arc in front of him at the table so he could sit up against the table. I don't know if that really would help, but you get the sense, that he must have been eating because his brain was working really well.
Yeah.
And he does die fairly young. If you look at his lifetime, he's in his 40s when he died. 49, I think. 49. 48, 49. You can see. Right here. 49. Have to do this since we have this fancy screen. So not sure what he really looked like. But he was a Dominican. And he was, and Aristotelian expert. Clearly, when you look at the number of volumes that he wrote in the short amount of time that he lived, plus all the other things he's doing, it's overwhelming. I can't figure out how the heck he did it. He didn't have Microsoft Word. He had to have scribes writing for him, and so on. So I imagine he dictated to people who wrote down. I don't know that he wrote so much himself, although he might have. Who knows, right? But he really wrote a lot. He became a saint, and one of the requirements for you to become canonized is that you're responsible for miracles. And one of the committee criticized, him by saying, but he has no miracles, that we can attribute to him. And the one other committee member said, every summa, every article in the Summa is a miracle, right? So it's kind of neat, that he basically became a saint because of his thinking, as opposed to doing any specific miracles. It's just thinking. And what he's really going to do is rescue this dilemma and merge Plato and Aristotle. In fact, he's considered to have out-Platoed Plato and out-Aristotled Aristotle. So, because you need Plato in order to keep the dogma fine, right? And you need Aristotle because Aristotle is so brilliant. In fact, Aquinas referred to Aristotle as the philosopher, right? This is really the tradition of knowledge, right? That they're aware of now, and they want to accept it. They're, basically the learned community is in the church, right? There's no competition, right? All the people that want to learn and know things are in the monasteries or the convents, right? And so, these are the people that want to study all this stuff, and they are want to resolve these conflicts. So, if we think about it in kind of an easy way, the way I like just drawing it, if you think, okay, so Plato gives us two causes in Aristotle's terminology. The one is matter, and the other one is the ideas, right? So this in Christian terminology becomes, it's confusing, because you want to say this is earth, and you want to say that this is heaven, right? But keep in mind that in the physical sense that Augustine talks about, matter has to include a heaven, right? And this is our soul. Our soul is attached to the ideas somehow. Very confusing, not very persuasive, Plato's ideas. But remember, that's the earliest we have, and that's still with us. When you ask people today, do you have a soul? Of course I do. Well, what is it? Right? I ask people, and there's all kinds of answers to what this is. Of course, some people will say, no, there's no soul. I'm just, this mind with, the wetware, and the software that I load in my wetware, and that's all I am. But we still culturally really like the idea of having a soul, and that's what we think of as our personality, our consciousness, and so on. But remember, it has no substance for Plato. Well, Aristotle does away with this whole thing. Says that there's nothing that doesn't have substance. Mm-hmm. And as a result, when we look at the universe, the cosmos, everything has four causes, and that includes substance or matter, and it includes the ideas, which of course now are also thought about it as form, the shape of the thing. Because the shape of the thing is what we mean when we say that's a chair, right? It has substance that makes it up, but when we say that's a chair and that's a table, they both have substance, but that has the shape of a chair and that has the shape of a table,
Right.
right? And we also had the efficient cost